All right, gang, today we're going to talk about the difference between performance and health. I think that there is some misconceptions on what both of these mean. I think there's some misconceptions on the fact that I can be as healthy as possible and perform at the highest level as possible. And it's my hope that I can kind of get you to change your mind a little bit and maybe think of performance versus health, not performance and health. Before I say anything, I think it's important that we understand that neither one is better than the other. And so I think a lot of emotions kind of get tied up in here. And if I start to say, well, if you're gonna be performing in something, you gotta ditch your health, I think we start to get a little bit anxious, maybe even a little bit angry, and we start to kind of unravel. So again, before I go anywhere, understand that me saying you having performance and giving up health is not a bad thing. So right off the bat, number one, you can't have both. I've been saying this for a long time, and I've had clients and athletes sort of question me on it. And the biggest question that comes out of this is, why is it okay for me to ditch health if it means for performance? First and foremost, I don't think you're ditching health. I think we have to understand that the definition of health, although we can find it in a textbook, I'm sure you can go and you can ask your doctor, your physical therapist, your athletic trainer. Everyone has sort of this definition as these experts, but ask yourself, what does health mean? And I think what we come to find is that we really box in this idea of health, is health has to fit this perfect example that's in my mind. But health is gonna be very, very different to each of us. And so I might consider being healthy mean X amount of hours of activity a week versus my father. He might consider health being more on the mental side of things. Is he making sure that he's just enjoying life in his older years? So don't box yourself into this rigid definition of health. More importantly for my athletes, right? I think as athletes, we have to understand that as an athlete, that part of our life will sooner rather than later disappear. So whether or not I'm a high school level athlete or a collegiate level athlete, the chances of us moving on to the next level, especially as we progress, becomes shorter and shorter. So if I want to do everything I can to perform at the highest level possible, whether that means I'm a high school student and I simply want to win a state championship, or I'm a college level athlete and I want to make it to the pros, why would I as a coach be telling that person, you know what, hey, I want you to be as healthy as possible. It's gonna take away from your performance and therefore take away chances of you reaching that goal. When we start to restructure both performance and health in that way, I think we can start to see that health can take a little bit of a back seat for a couple months out of my year or for a couple years out of my life. And it really isn't my job, my responsibility, or my place as a coach to tell someone what they must do. So here's a fun game, you know, while you're listening to me ramble. Number two is I want you to define the terms healthy and unhealthy. And here's the biggest mistake that a lot of us will make. We'll treat it as a straight line. And so I have healthy, and I have unhealthy. And we sort of have this continuum. And so we have this ebb and flow, and we'll rank individuals on their health versus not health. And that's not what health is. So let's use an example here. So for those of us, whether you're competing for performance or you're someone who's just going to the gym because you want to be healthier, let's take the individual who every night has 2 beers. Okay, and if we hear that in isolation, we say, oh well, 2 beers every night, that person's not that healthy. Okay, but what if every other aspect of their life was perfect? What if they got their 8 hours of sleep, they trained 4 to 5 times a week, they weren't stressed, everything else they did was in line, right? And now I can compare that beer drinker to maybe a soda drinker who's having 4 or 5 drinks a day. Who would we say is the healthy one here? And I'm not saying that the beer drinker is healthier than the soda drinker. I'm starting to show you examples, right? Let's say that maybe that soda drinker isn't having 4 or 5, maybe they're having only 1 or 2. Well, who is healthier? Who is health? Who isn't health, right? Or we could add in a third example and we could have someone who doesn't drink beer, doesn't drink soda, is eating right, is doing everything right, but they have a real high intense job and their resting heart rate is like 80 beats a minute, right? They're just totally stressed out from work all the time. Well, out of these 3, who are we gonna say is the healthy one? If we have to rank them 1, 2, 3 order, who to you is health, who to you is not healthy, right? I'm not saying that we're gonna rank these at all because there's a lot more that goes into this, but I think it's very important for us to let go of this continuum approach and start to look at health as this very ambiguous sort of term, and to understand that there's a lot that goes into health and a lot that goes into performance. Number 3, our definition of health is too rigid. There's no universal law that says I am or I am not healthy. Yes, we have doctors' opinions, we have standards that we like to live by, whether it's community standards, whether it's what my family lives by. This rigidity is forcing us to have some cognitive dissonance when it comes to my goals of performance. And what I mean by that is we have to understand that we have been bombarded with health advice for many of us ever since we can remember, and we put up these boundaries and these walls. So I'll spill number 3 into number 4, and this is kind of tying in my point of why performance and health are different and why it's not necessarily a bad thing for me to want to perform versus just wanting to exercise for the health benefits. My athletes, right, they're gonna consume a lot of sugar. They're gonna consume a lot of caffeine, whether in the form of coffee or energy drinks. And let's be honest, a lot of our favorite athletes, whether at the collegiate professional level, are taking some type of illegal supplement. So a lot of us, we would call this anabolics, we would call this steroids. If you're floating around the internet, we would call this gear, right? And we need to separate ourselves from this, right? My favorite football player, if he gets caught taking steroids, he can still be my favorite football player, right? I'm not trying to say, number 1, I'm not advocating steroids, but number 2, I think, again, we're too rigid with all of this because when we find out that our favorite athletes are taking something that we would consider unhealthy, it somehow in our mind makes us say, well, they're less of a good person. And again, this goes back to I'm making rigid rules in my head of what is and what isn't healthy. Now, let's take the roids out, right? But these 3, these energy drinks, caffeine, and sugar, as a coach, it's not my responsibility to walk into a weight room with a high school or collegiate level team and tell them that they have to give up sugar because it's unhealthy. And I think for coaches or parents or anyone who is responsible for being in charge of an athlete, especially younger athletes, this is incredibly difficult for us to do. Because we know that sugar taken in large quantities is not healthy. But what we also know is that little bit of that spike, a little bit of sugar, whether or whether it's caffeine, is going to help with performance. And so let's say I walk into a high school weight room and I'm hired as their strength and conditioning coach, and their number 1 goal from coaching staff all the way down is to win a state championship. If I go in there and I start preaching to them, hey, caffeine is terrible for you, it raises your heart rate, like blood pressure, don't take any types of caffeine, you're gonna thank me in 20 years. Number 1, they're not really gonna listen to me. Number 2, I'm not doing them justice by getting them to their goal of a state championship. Now, we can have discussions and we can say, hey, you know what, like limit your caffeine intake, understand that this isn't the only way to increase performance. So as coaches, I think it's important that we have that blend of understanding what is performance, what are you being hired for, what is my athlete or my client interested in. And as athletes, we need to understand that, hey, there is a time and place for me to have a little bit of sugar, there is time and place for me to have a little bit of caffeine. I'll take this point number 4 and I'll put it in a real life example, and I think especially where we're at now, doctors are getting a lot of, people just don't really like doctors right now. And so we'll use the flu shot as an example. And people such as myself, strength and conditioning coaches, personal trainers, like we have opinions on everything. Oftentimes it's well out of our scope of practice. But because of who we are, we don't care and we say it anyway. So we hear of doctors who prescribe a flu shot without really talking about like basic lifestyle guidelines. You know, they don't encourage their patients to go out and to walk, to get vitamin D, to get in the sun. They don't encourage them to eat healthy. They don't encourage them to get on some exercise plan, right? They just come in, they say, hey, it's flu season, here's your shot, right? And we say, oh my goodness, if only more doctors were to prescribe all of these other things, we would have a such healthier community, right? It's not the doctor's job to explain the differences between a shot and healthy lifestyle. It is their job to make sure that the individual in front of them is healthy. Again, don't go back to the rigidity of what you believe is healthy, is that we know that taking a flu shot for some individuals, it helps fight chances of getting the flu. So think of this in terms of a coach. We can go in and me as a coach, I might say I would much rather someone exercise and have good nutrition and sleep right versus getting a shot. But if they're not gonna listen to any of this, I need to bring down my needs, my wants, my perceptions, and understand the person in front of me. So I hope that this kind of helps when we're looking back at what the person in front of me wants. If they come in and they say they want to be the next state champion, and all I'm telling them is eat your fruits and vegetables, there's some disconnect there, right? Moving on, we're going to, so I've talked all the way down here about kind of what health is, didn't really touch on performance. Now let's look at performance and the negative side of performance and why performance and health aren't the same thing. Whether at the structural level, neurological level, just everyday stress of an elite level athlete, that is by no means healthy. We can take the real quick answer here and say, look at any professional athlete. Okay, so great example, Tom Brady just retired at what, 42, 43, and he's like, people are mind blown. How can he play in a sport that long? He's considered, ancient. But in the health realm, is 43 really considered that old? No, not at all. The impact on your body, the impact on your immune system, the impact just on you as a human needing to compete is far greater than what we would consider healthy. Look at a lot of ex-athletes, whether it's just from the collegiate level or the professional level. We're looking at knee replacements, hip replacements. They're walking around doubled over in pain. We're looking at things like concussions, even spilling into brain injuries, right? So we can't look at athletes as our pinnacle of health. We need to look at our athletes as a pinnacle of performance. For a lot of us as coaches, and I feel like as just general pop exercisers, we start to get a little angry down here. And we say, well, if it was so unhealthy, why would they do it? They do it because there is nothing in this world that is more important to them than winning. And again, let's take down our rigidity. Like, if that is what is most important to them, who are we to say that it's not? Don't quote me on the actual percentage, but I know it is a majority of individuals. This was done a while ago. A majority of individuals who were headed to or who have been to the Olympics were asked if winning a gold medal meant chopping years off your life. the majority of those asked would say, hands down, they would chop their life short if it meant a gold medal. And I think to us, especially as general pop exercisers, like that's mind-blowing. I would never, if someone approached me and said, hey, you could win gold at the next Olympics, but you're gonna die at 60, I would say you're crazy. So we have to understand that things like this structural, this neurological, this just all of this damage that they're getting is like, that means nothing to them. They want that championship. Also, if they're a professional athlete, they want that money. That's how they put food on the table for their family. So I do believe there's a very big disconnect between what we're seeing on the TV as what we're looking at as pinnacle for performance and what we understand as just general population and why we're going to the gym, why we're trying to pursue health and wellness. To add in just a little bit more, because I know I've been talking about this huge gap between these professional level athletes and just you and I as general pop individuals, is we have to understand that even in my approach to health and wellness, there's a big disconnect when I go to the gym and I say, I am here strictly for health. And then I start loading up the bar. And then every day I'm just crushing myself under heavy squats. I'm pulling heavy deads off the ground. Every day I'm feeling myself getting pretty banged up, right? Is that wrong? Well, that would be more performance-minded training. And the wrongness isn't my training. The wrong here is that I'm saying I want health, and now I am exercising for performance. And so all of this kind of ties into number 6, our final point here. It absolutely doesn't matter what your goal is. The issue here is that for many of us, our goal doesn't align with our training and our lifestyle. And so we say we want performance, but we're afraid of the caffeine, we're afraid of the sugar, we're afraid of going really hard in the weight room. Or we say we want health, but then we're that individual who feels like we're missing out if we're not constantly chasing really heavy weights, really heavy big sets. And it's the disconnect, not the actual path that you take, that is what I believe is getting in our way in terms of reaching our goals. And by no means do I want to turn this into a how to reach your goals lecture, but I do think a final point here is to truly ask yourself, have a conversation with your coach on what your goals are. Do they align with a more of a health and wellness approach? Do they align with a more of a performance-based approach? And then make sure that your training and your lifestyle matches whatever you and your coach decide. So that's all I have for today, performance versus health. If you guys liked, please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I'll make sure to answer them. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.